Massive thank you as always to patrons Sarah Turner, Rebecca Johns and Justin Harper. And this week's random call out goes to patron Genevieve Cleverly. You can support us too at patreon.com/it's not just in your head, or follow us on social media and help spread the word. Today, psychotherapist Harriet, Fraad and substance abuse counsellor Ikoi Hero talk to Tyson Yunkaporta, author of Sand Talk, How Indigenous Thinking Can Save the World. Tyson belongs to the Apalech Clan from Western Cape, York, and is a senior lecturer in Indigenous Knowledge at Deakin University.
In the mental health field, too often, we've made it seem as if it's just in your head.
The landlord can hijack the rent by 20%. That impacts people's mental health.
Can't have a profit-driven mental health care system if we want our people to be connected and healthy.
In Sand Talk, you say that you're coming from a perspective of examining global systems from an Indigenous knowledge perspective. But there's also a bit in there where you say perhaps the worst possible outcome of this work would be civilization embracing these ideas. So I don't know if you have had any repercussions from having written this book. Has it come back sort of positive or negative? What's been the sort of response?
There's no such thing as positive and negative. It's, it's like with the whole COVID thing, that there's no information, there's just disinformation. And it's the same. There's, look at this, what you just mentioned, that part of the book. So that's, I believe that was in the chapter Forever Limited, that was the original title of the book, Forever LTD. And that was the original message of the book, that, liberalism just shapeshifts. It embraces any threat or challenge. It embraces it completely and takes on the trappings, the tokens, the window dressing, and just dresses up the same old structural, extractivism and, inequality that's required for the system to function. It just sort of dresses it up and makes everybody feel a bit better for a while. I mean, even liberalism itself, the whole idea of liberty, that's like, people going, we don't want oligarchs anymore. We're just, that's it. Revolution finished. We don't want oligarchs anymore. And so it's like, yeah. So the oligarchs are like, yeah. No, well, that's, liberty. Like, yeah, absolutely. I'm right with you, my brothers and sisters. We're going to be liberal now. And it's still oligarchs. Doesn't matter. Right. Doesn't matter what you do. You could go, like 99% of the world could go, yeah, no, anarchy. We want anarchy. And, the oligarchs would go, yeah, anarchy.
Yeah.
That's great. Off we go. And it'd just be, the same old gammon, not free markets, like, monopoly, frickin' extraction, everybody a slave. Like, anyway, that was the title of the book, and the original draft of the book was was considered to be really negative. So they, the publishers went, no. What about how Indigenous thinking can save the world? I'm like, all right, man, whatever you like. And but still, even with all those bits taken out, not all of them, but a lot of the kind of, a lot more sort of, this is what the future is as the civilization continues to decline. And there's not anything we can do about it. A lot of those bits were kind of smoothed over or taken out, but people were still reacting when it first came out. It didn't sell very many copies. People were like, yeah, no, it's good, and it's quite inspiring, but also it's very negative about the future. Like, I don't think it's going to be that dire, like, for a very long time. We've got at least a century before everything's on fire. And then all of a sudden, everything was on fire. And people are inhaling this book like air, like drowning people, like grabbing the book. Oh, this one's going to save the world with ancient wisdom. And I think they just projected all their longings onto it and go, oh yeah, this has got answers. It really doesn't. It really doesn't. It's just a kind of a, I don't know, it's like a suicide note book.
It's really interesting, actually. This article came out today, and it's sort of addressing where this podcast sits, which is that the system that we all live in plays a huge part sort of in our mental and physical health. And that because of that, oftentimes you can actually lose any sense of hope or agency, right? The flip side being the sort of Jordan Petersons of the world who are just like, no, everything's on your shoulders. You have to do everything. Don't worry about economics. Just, get to work, etc. And I think that presumably it's really interesting to hear that the book publishers wanted to give it the twist, the positive spin, right? Like, no, this, this there is a reason to be positive or whatever. But
that wasn't ideological. It was just pure. I mean, it was just marketing genius. I just defer to others on that kind of thing. I don't know how to brand myself.
Right. Yeah, right. But here's the thing. Even if you felt like it was maybe a bit of a suicide note, like reading how your ideas around sort of social structure or social responsibility sort of echoed things from anarchism or communism, and
anarcho-communism even.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
From the early 1900s, that's the closest thing I've been able to find to what my insane, cultish, bloody ideological rants in that book mirror. The other worst thing that could happen is not just that liberalism would take it and jiu-jitsu it towards its own ends, but it would be even worse if everybody wholeheartedly took it on and the world moved towards my way of thinking. Like everyone would be dead in a couple of weeks. You can't have that's why you don't have unilateral ideas and solutions to things. It's a cultural, pipe bomb to do that. We need to move away from the idea of great men and gurus and, these brilliant authors and thinkers and all sense makers and all this rubbish. And we need to engage in collective sense making in our communities in sort of networked ways. But, then again, that's just one man's solution once again. So that's probably bullcrap as well, Yeah.
Well, that isn't just your way of doing things. There are feminists with consciousness raising, and Frigga Haug, the German political organizer and feminist, who say that we have to learn our program from one another rather than from some manuscript somewhere or somebody's speech that thinks they know what's right for everybody without knowing everyone.
Let me just interrupt you there, Harriet, and explain feminism to you. I'm only joking.
Well, I appreciate your male knowledge of the topic. There are these impulses on the left that the program doesn't come from above. The program comes from everyone sharing what their lives are and where the strains in their lives are. And that's been one of the better elements of feminism from the start, with consciousness raising. What is our program? Well, what are we feeling? Where do we feel the strain in our lives?
Well, collective consciousness has been hijacked.
Yes.
Hijacked it, even their torches of freedom, like from then on, pretty much.
Yeah, but those impulses are still there, where if people are heard, their analyses can emerge, and from there a program can emerge that has some authenticity for people. I'm more hopeful than you, obviously.
Oh man, this is just
not much of a stretch.
Feel better already, I tell you. All right, Harriet's onto it. Thank God. Great name too.
I think it's sort of a faux British aristocrat name, so I think it's silly, but I'm glad you like it.
I was really taken by the very precise description of liberalism in the book, because, as I was reading it, it kind of reminded me of the movie The Blob.
Yes.
I don't know if anyone else is familiar.
Expand.
Like that was the visual that really stuck with me once that definition was made. And it really is, a good description of what really happens, in terms of its ability to wear whatever shape a population projects through disruption or dissent, right? Like, a lot of the whole quote unquote woke.
Yeah.
In discourse in our society, whether it's conservatism or whether it's, liberalism, although they're, both kind of similar, but it was just it's one of like this blob just bulldozing through everywhere.
Yeah, they're very good at it. Look, it's interesting with the whole woke thing and this idea of cancel culture and the way it's been really mislabeled as an instrument of the left, of a psychotechnology that belongs to the left. It's not. The left is a late adopter, a very late adopter of cancel, what they're calling cancel culture or whatever. It was that was invented by oligarchs and their useful idiots on the right. Like, arguably, like the first. With the printing presses, and the first things off them were Catherine Great's having sex with her horse, cancelled, because they didn't want her to end feudalism. And then the very next thing is cancelling the Jews, because we need to redirect people's attention away from these oligarchs and give them a different mysterious enemy to direct their efforts towards, and from there right the way through to it wasn't called being cancelled, it was called being Dixie checked, if you remember, in its latest permutation. Right. It was called being Donahued. Cancel culture was invented. It was like deployed in its current form for anybody who questioned the invasion of Iraq. And they cancelled France, and it's been ongoing throughout.
Freedom Prize, yes.
If you can remember, and I can't even remember her, I can't even think of her name. That's how cancelled she was. But the comedian who did the freaking hilarious thing, like holding up Trump's severed head kind of thing.
Oh, yeah.
She got so freaking cancelled that she still can't get on an airplane. That's how cancelled she is. She's on a no-fly list for the rest of her life. That poor thing. She got, they know how to cancel a fella. And then all of a sudden, it's like, it's like the left in desperation, like picks up this psychotechnology that's been weaponized just so horrendously, picks it up for the first time and tries to use it. And yes, there's some missteps and some mistakes and some, owning the libs moments, SJWs making idiots of themselves, trying to deploy this thing and saying silly things. Like, because we just picked it up. We're still trying to figure out where the safety catch is. You know what I mean? Give us a minute. We're trying to join in this game for a minute. We're trying to figure out how this weapon works. Just let us figure it out for 5 minutes. Anyway, that's my rant done about that. It's just really annoying to me the way it's being framed as something that the left invented somehow, and that
no.
It's like, no. Stop it.
I'm definitely seeing some useful versions of it online recently in the UK, because the sort of housing and landlord situation is pretty dire. So a lot of one has been about food, and the other this recent guy has been blowing up online, sort of exposing crap landlords. So it is, like you say, awesome. it's sort of a weapon, and it's just how it actually gets used. And
that's directing it towards something that's semi-structural, which is pretty good. So rather than playing the liberalism game of just addressing the window dressing, and just addressing the cultural stuff on the surface, the language stuff like that, it's the left is starting to understand, hang on, no, this is structuralism. I looked up what, we've looked up what critical race theory actually means, and okay, it's not about like telling white people they're evil. It's like individually and permanently. It's actually about addressing the systemic and structural issues, which, we've kind of been blind to for a couple of decades because of post-structuralism. Sorry, Harriet, I'm going to blame the feminists for post-structuralist feminism, because we took it on as Indigenous scholars as well. We used post-structuralist feminism as the basis for building a lot of our anti-colonial and, Indigenous standpoint theory, all this kind of stuff. We kind of just robbed you on that one. Sorry about that, sis.
Right.
And that just blinded us for a couple of decades to the actual structural business of colonization,
Yes.
liberalism, extractivism, imperialism, like the whole thing, how it's structured. I mean, so Liam mentions real estate. It's like everything's about that. Police shootings of black people are about real estate and zoning, and and if you dig down a bit more from an Indigenous perspective, it is all about the necessity of having land as capital. And if you took that one out, the whole Jenga tower is going to fall. So, if we had start to address our critiques to the structure of things, which I think people are starting to do.
Hopefully.
You see Peter Joseph, the one who did the Zeitgeist films? He's had a complete flip over the last couple of years.
Oh, really?
Just completely rejecting post-structuralism, and he's just going for the structures now.
Well, I think that one of the things that's happened, it's on a kind of inchoate automatic level in the United States, with 17 million people dropping out of leaving their jobs and hundreds of thousands on strike, is this awareness that it's about the whole system of private property and capitalism that has to go. And one of the things that's happening is people are understanding that racism was invented. I'm just so taken by that deliberate instruction in division of the oppressed peoples that happened after Bacon's rebellion in the United States. And there were about 1,800 other rebellions, which were unities of bondspeople who were paying off their bond to be shipped over to America, and freed black men and slaves and some disgruntled aristocrats to overthrow the system, after which they deliberately instituted white privilege to divide blacks and whites and created racism, which Adolf Reed, the black Marxist, who's a really smart professor, writes about, that even Jim Crow laws in the United States were basically protecting the elites. And they were just throwing out a hierarchy to give whites a division between themselves and black people. A division that was threatened with the Communist Party in the 30s, where black and white tenant farmers united and were crushed. But that those divisions between people are beginning to be seen as divisions between the mass of people that needs to rise together. And that's the hope.
See, that entire history, if you want proof of that, all you have to do is look at pirate accents. And like the actual accents of the Pirates of the Caribbean,
what are they? What do you mean?
Mostly foremost. Well, have you ever noticed that pirate accents are always Irish?
No, I didn't notice. I'm not.
So this is all
to
because Irish slaves who who kind of got released when everyone decided, no, we'll just because slaves keep running and then they just blend in.
Right.
So what if we just get all the people who look like this, and then they're slaves, and then they can't run away? You know what I mean? So get the black ones. We'll get them. So see, you're Irish, and so they released all of them, and that, what are they going to do for a living? Well, they're pirates. And then, of course, there was so much resistance in that area of the world that's not written into history from all the black slaves who just did amazing stuff. I mean, there's reasons why everybody hates Haiti, and Haiti keeps getting flogged over and over again. It's because, that was a successful regaining of sovereignty, and we have to make sure everybody knows that will be punished forever, that we will be Rome and you will be Carthage, and there will be salt sown into your earth forever, and you will be destroyed forever if you even attempt that. So they're still punishing Haiti. But you look at, a lot of the pirates of the Caribbean were slaves, black slaves and Irish slaves who escaped, and they all ended up with Irish accents. And that's why Jamaican sounds like it does. You listen close to Jamaican, it's like, oh shit, that's like Irish African there.
No, it makes sense. It all makes sense once you see it from a class perspective, which is so thoroughly repressed. Now there's room at the top for people who are brown. There's room at the top for ambitious women, as long as the corporate structure stays intact.
Oh, and as long as you're thinking like a white male, and you can do anything. As long as you're thinking and speaking and acting as a white male and continuing the project of extraction and progress.
No,
and,
just a rich white male. Not any white male. Just a rich white male.
You can have a turban. You'd be right. You CEO. That's all fine.
That's right.
Yeah.
Bin Salman, from Saudi Arabia, is a good friend. Even if he hacks up journalists, he has a lot of money and a lot of property. And so he's in.
Just as long as he doesn't try to do a secular democracy there, he'll be safe as houses.
That's right.
We do like to have our fundamentalist, extremist human rights abusers in the Middle East as our allies. That's very important. We can't be having secular democracies popping up all over the place over there. That's radicalism that needs to be destroyed immediately. There in South America and everywhere else.
You need hate magnets so that people don't look at the United States. They look at these despots instead. And they don't look at the United States. They even have Israel in there as a hate magnet and playing the part to the hilt. But it disrupts the potential unity of that area and the people in it.
Geez, Israel really lean into that one, didn't they?
Yes, they sure did. But of course, if you give a people someone else's land that isn't yours, the people whose land it is might get annoyed. I personally would like to give them Mississippi. I think that would be a wise choice. Or maybe Alabama or Idaho, and let the people who are indigenous to that area, the Palestinians, do their thing. Since you're at least we'd be giving away land that's ours for a change.
Yep. And while we're at it, we can give all the Canadian truckers, we can give them their big white ethno-state in sort of a strip running from north to south, and then they can all go there.
They can all go there and get COVID and die.
Yeah.
It's a really optimistic
get COVID
future.
and die. That's a soundbite. That's an SJW woke soundbite that's going to define everything that you've ever said. I want to talk about Japan too at some stage, so let's have a look at that. But we'll get into that after.
I'm Japanese, so I would be really...
That's why I want to talk about Japan, basically just so that you'll say something. All you are is a name in a font on my screen at the moment. I haven't seen you yet.
I mean, a lot of my job is about listening, right? So, but one of the things that that really did strike me in, especially since my formal position is, substance use disorder counselor, right? Is, the discussion about your comment about, if you want to see smart, creative children, you go to the juvenile detention facilities.
Yeah.
Right. And that, no, and I mean, that is, and it's also, to a certain degree, it reminds me of a lot about how, ADHD is treated in our society, or what gets labeled attention deficit disorder.
Right. Which is energy.
It's many things, I think just like I'm not a psychiatrist, so I'm not going to cross over into that area. But I think a lot of times, as a society, we kind of reduce everything into this one thing and kind of force everyone into this one box instead of really trying to figure out what is happening with the person in front of you, because that's one of the downsides of a lot of modern treatment is it's kind of a reductive flow chart.
Well, it is indeed a pigeonholing that matches a pharmaceutical, because ADHD was already exposed as a conspiracy between the psychiatrists and the makers of Ritalin to promote Ritalin, and it's crap. and it's not necessary. Kids have a lot of energy. That's fine. Let them jump around. That's okay.
Well, I got diagnosed with adult ADHD. But there's an argument about that because they pretty much go, no, you don't get to have the privileges of youth in having this ADHD. We call it conduct disorder. And in the textbook, I looked it up, and in the psych textbook, it said, many figures from history had adult ADHD or conduct disorder, CD. Jesus, Gandhi. And they were listing all these terrible people who did terrible things. But anyway, that might be the reason why Liam has lost control of this interview.
No, there's definitely no loss of control. The thing that I wanted to jump on, because it's like the perfect moment, is you spoke really you wrote really well about what you said was a almost true conspiracy theory about the school system over time. And I don't know.
Hang on, are we talking about my book here? Or
Yeah.
Okay, I didn't know that was the purpose of the podcast. I thought you were just introing me with that, and then we were going to hear from Ikoi and Harriet on their stuff. All right. So it's a panel thing we're looking. Okay, cool, sweet.
Yeah.
Sorry,
it was more just like I don't know whether you wanted to talk about that or recount your story, because ultimately you said this is all verifiable stuff. It's all true. But you're sort of spinning a story to illustrate a point. And actually, it read as remarkably true, as a form of control.
The Prussian thing.
Yeah.
My Prussian conspiracy theory.
Yeah, do it. Let's hear it.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So, it was what I was trying to offer was, actually, I was sort of ego way trying to bust that one, ego way, just trying to enjoying myself with saying, because I kind of think it's true, but it's but I know that it's structured like disinformation is structured. I know that it's a selective narrative path through history that I've concocted in response to quite a bit of Russian disinformation and libertarian propaganda that I was deeply inhaling at the time. You know what I mean? So I knew it was bullshit. And so I kind of I just offered it as I just wanted to enjoy myself and write that because it's deeply satisfying to bloody just jump fully into your ideology and just believe it and the fantasy of it for a minute and rewrite history from your ideological point of view. It's very satisfying. It's even more satisfying when people punch the air and want to high five you and say, yes, that's it, that's true. But you got to avoid that. You have to avoid that like the plague, and you have to critique yourself all the time. You have to sabotage yourself all the time. And it's not to try and find the truth. It's just to try and stop yourself getting completely sucked into the vortex of your own Kool-Aid swirling down the drain. It's, yeah. So from that framing, Prussia, let's jump into it. The Japanese love Prussia, by the way, Ikoi.
Oh, yes. Oh, I know. I'm quite aware.
Anime is pretty much built on Prussia and pedophilia. That's the the basis of the entire discipline. You didn't laugh then. I hope that didn't really upset you.
No. You're just soaking it in.
There is this amazing thing in Japan of this kind of haggotry around these kind of white supremacist mythologies that somehow have entered, there and just kind of percolated for a while until it really started bubbling up through 4chan. Before the West discovered that, all these disaffected youth with no hope of ever making any meaningful connection with anybody or ever finding meaningful work or, anything, all those young men bloody getting in there and doing their thing, pretty much ended up with, the knock on, as the cascade of events after that was horrendous. But Prussia's right in there. Prussia. So, where do you start? I like to start many thousands of years ago with that Prussia or Prussia or whatever you want to. I don't know how they said it, but the people who were living by trading hemp and amber from along the coast and were fishing and, drying fish and trading that. So the indigenous people who were there forever. And then, then you had the Crusades and the Order of Teutonic Knights, from the Germanic regions there that developed, and just kind of, come back all bitter from the Crusades and sort of wanted to make their ethno-state. And, that dream of creating this thing, this thing of total social control. They kind of saw the last remnants of that failed civilization built on total control. There they saw remnants of that in the Middle East. Just vestigial remains of that, because that had failed in most of the Middle East. I reckon has returned over the last few centuries, particularly to pastoralism and tribalism and ways of living in place and in the landscape. Probably they did the experiment of civilization and it failed. Anyway, your Order of Teutonic Knights brought back that pattern, what they'd seen there, and they wanted to make their own ethno-state there, and they tried and tried. Eventually they succeeded with killing a bunch of indigenous people in Prussia, and that's how Prussia began. And it was just always this dream of resurrecting the glory of Rome. So a lot of your fascist stuff, and fascism of course comes from those Roman fasces, the bundles of rods with the axe in the middle that represents Roman power, like state authority or all that kind of thing, and absolute power. And that's it. So they had to get these centralized bureaucracies happening. And this was right on the cusp as things were moving towards industrialization. So they had the tech. So this isn't the Teutonic Knights, by the way. I've skipped ahead a bit. So they made their ethno-state and they militarizing, and eventually warfare starts to become industrialized more and more. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of stuff if you look into the big businesses and arms dealers of the time coming out of there with the new tech in cannons and all that sort of thing. There's you can get lost in there for weeks. That's a hell of a rabbit hole. But of course, Prussia did quite well, because they were completely militaristic and, such like a prison culture where just everything was just plain, straight surfaces, everything replicated, everybody, this regimentalizing of things, because they had to work towards developing this standing army, a permanent standing army, something that never happened in history before, because nobody can have a permanent standing army. You could it's really hard. People have got to go home and, harvest their crops and see their kids. It's really an anti-human thing. So anyway, they did pretty well with that, but they didn't quite get there. And the French kicked their ass, of course, and so they had to double down. So when the French had kicked their ass, they'd ordered all the soldiers to just rush forward to their certain death. Mm-hmm. And the soldiers said, fuck that, and turned around and ran back, And so, of course, the officers said, well, that's why we lost. That's why the French beat us. So they then doubled down. They said, okay, we need to make these people into machines who can override the fear of death to follow an order. How the hell will we do that? And this is all the birth of behavioral psychology and everything else. They had the best scientists working on it. And they were really looking at animal husbandry techniques. And so how do we train dogs to, because we can get dogs to do it. We can get horses to do it. We can force a horse to jump off a cliff. But, because it understands these signals to go forward, and its fear of punishment and the reinforcement that's happened over years will drive it forward and will force that horse to kill itself. So we need people to be able to do the same thing. And so that's where they invented public education, because they found that in animal husbandry techniques, in the domestication of wild animals, there were these basic principles of, remove the young from their parents, from their parent or parents in the daylight hours. Keep them in confined spaces with little stimulation, and just get them to perform purposeless tasks with positive and negative reinforcement. And you can break an animal. You can reduce its capacity for problem solving, and basically its agency and its neurological capacity. You can break that down and just retard a being into a domesticated thing that will follow orders no matter what. But the key part, they were starting with the young. And so they invented this new technology of public education. And it was so successful that they kicked France's ass, because they finally had completely obedient soldiery who would just do whatever they were told, no matter what, and would stay put, even if it meant they were going to die. Yeah, so they did really well, and they applied that to the factories as well, because the tech was there for the industrial era then, but the social technology wasn't there. There wasn't the structures there, and here's where it's so important to have a focus on structuralism, a focus on systems. The systems were not in place to make the technology, ramp up exponentially, so to maximize extraction. Because the people were all still situated out in the countryside around the waterways that would power the wheels for the mill. They weren't. There's no way they want to move into the stinking city, because the city's awful. It smells and it's horrible, and we all die within a few years because it's just disease and death. Why would we go there? No, we're going to stay out in the countryside. We can grow our own corn here. We can grow our own wheat. We can grind that in the mill. We're good. So the tech was there, but the social tech wasn't there. So they, no matter what they did, they couldn't make it work. So I guess in terms of governance, then they invented the idea of the nation. And the nation is just a little over a century old, when that experiment began, as a way of organizing people into massive sovereign entities of millions and millions of people all speaking the same language or languages. And, as the early Prussian syllabus documents said, a citizenry that was alike in thought, word, and deed. That was the goal, and the goal was to create, and it still is today. It's still expressed. I'm quite involved in education. That's what all my qualifications are in, and got a doctorate in this. It's still the openly stated goal of education is to prepare students for the workforce.
Right.
You got to go into one of the forces. So they're armed forces or the police force, or they're all forces, the workforce. You are in that force because it's a militaristic kind of paradigm. And this all comes down from the Prussians because it worked so freaking well. It was the social tech that was needed. It was the psychological technologies that were needed. It was the full raft of things that were needed to make a nation possible, to make an industrial era possible, to maximize extraction and basically kill the planet to enrich some oligarchs for a while. So the entire world was co-opted into this. And one of the big mechanisms for that was public education, and it still is. Mind you, at the same time, I'm not like one of these people who's like, education's evil, and you know what I mean? I'm quite aware. I'm aware. So all those things are true, but the narrative path I've chosen through that, and the discourse I've chosen, and the rhetorical devices that I've employed to tell that story are all driving people towards a conclusion that I want them to arrive at. I want them to arrive at that conclusion. I want them to feel the need to take action. I want to promote my pseudo-scientific ideology, that has lots of facts behind it, and where I can just sort of go, well, this is the problem. Hey, how about this solution? Have you heard of, anarcho-syndicalism? Let me show you. You know what I mean? It's a freaking sales pitch. I've been co-opted by liberalism into the same freaking patterns. I'm using PR. I'm using guru tricks from cults to brainwash people with this freaking stupid story. Every bit of it is true, but there's more to the context than that. And I could have chosen a very different narrative pathway through that would also use exactly true facts and data points to suggest that that human beings have been liberated through education, that education uplifts people and empowers them, and has been the cause of every advancement that we've made in equality, in the rights of women, in decolonization. All these things has all come from education. I could tell that story too, and I could believe it just as much, and it would be just as true, which is to say, not freaking true at all. Because reality is a quantum soup of data points that we navigate our way through with collective sense making and listening to everybody's story, because you need all viewpoints. And in the aggregate, you can find responses that are a little more effective than what we got now. That was a long monologue.
It's good, though.
That was a really good one.
I know, it's arresting. It's arresting, and because I've got guru tricks, I got cultish rhetoric that I can deploy to ensnare your attention for 10 minutes. Good. And it's bullshit. I disrupt that.
I think you outline it in the book as well, because ultimately, the sort of statement you say is essentially that any complex system, you can't approach it with sort of simple, dumb ideas, right? Like it's that those simple ideas aren't going to encompass everything that the complex system has or is. And so in some ways, when you tell a story, by definition, you can't possibly be aware of the complexity of the story that you're actually telling. And so if you have consensus about a whole bunch of group of people all having different perspectives on it, then maybe you arrive at some kind of truth about the complex.
Well, we develop a heuristic, some kind of metaphor, or a collection of principles or whatever. We develop heuristics, and heuristics are great. They're useful while they're useful. They're like a theory, so they're like general relativity or something like that. That theory is useful in some context, but then you have to shift across. If I want to win at pool, at billiards, down at the pub, I'm going to use Newton. Newton's good for that, but then if I want my phone to work, I'm going to have to shift Einstein. You know what I mean? It's the same thing. We develop all these heuristics out of these narratives that we make. When they become a problem is when people become trapped in them.
Yeah.
And when the people who are teaching people the heuristics fall for audience capture, when I'm like, oh, Harriet hasn't said anything for like 15 minutes. She's like completely enthralled with what I'm saying. She must like those bits. So I'm going to expand on those bits. I'm going to keep going. No, Harriet, you're not going to audience capture me. I'm going to shut up now.
There's so many, one of the great thinkers like Hegel, that everything is simultaneously contradictory, is there in your work. And if people realize that, they won't be true believers, because they'll understand the other side as connected, not as God and the devil, but as the same person.
Yeah. I did have this really vulgar Marxist interpretation of Hegel for a long time. Well, I understood it as a binary, and I completely rejected it. It was a friend who set me straight on that recently as to what the dialectic really is all about. And I'm like, it is that multiplicity.
It is, and it's a real drawback in the United States. It's one thing or the other, instead of looking at the mix and understanding where to intervene in the mix. So if the truck drivers are rebelling, on the one hand, it's great that they're rebelling against a government. On the other hand, they're rebelling in a fascistic fashion. How do you negotiate that contradiction? Rather than they're bad, this one's good. I mean, that is religion. That is religious thinking, and it is poison. Yeah.
Look, and it really is, but there are things that end up in the cultural DNA of a nation that are there. So Ikoi, we're mentioning like how much of Prussia is in the sort of cultural reprogramming, out of the ashes of the old Japan. Like it's, there's this weird eugenicsy shit programmed into there that's like, it's like corrupted the cultural DNA of that place. And now that everybody's trying to project forward and control the future, because everyone's shitting themselves about China. Suddenly Japan, like ahead of the schedule, has been allowed to start developing a military. But the cultural software for that is already in place to create this military, machine and technology and social technology that is going to be able to be a weapon of the West to throw at China when they decide they want to do that. I don't know. That would be my low-level interpretation of that. But I imagine you probably got your finger on a lot of pulses that I don't there. What's your thoughts?
Well, you do make up a very good point of having like a cultural underpinning, right? I didn't grow up entirely in Japan, but I spent enough time there for, in terms of like popular culture and having, most of it was like space war stuff, like Macross and whatnot. But they're especially geared towards the boys, the militaristic.
Yes.
Right, the militaristic, heroic imagination wasn't
Hero's
really
journey. Ulysses. Yeah.
Yes, was always there. That never went away in Japanese culture, and that was such a contradiction to a degree. Because people also developed such a negative, there is a significant amount of, especially like older people who, are really glad that we no longer, or that we didn't have a military, a military anymore.
Right.
And that, we became a society that invested, to a certain degree on infrastructure and the people.
Mm-hmm.
And that did really kind of, that started to change, I think, with the 90s, with the downturn of Japanese economy. I think is kind of what kicked off that slide into militarism.
Oh, yeah, this chalice is poison.
Yeah.
Yeah, that realization.
But it is sometimes, the people that bridge that, they were adults during World War II, or young adults during World War II that are alive today. We are losing a lot of those people by, natural age.
Yeah.
But my grandfather died when I was like 5. But I remember him telling me that a lot of formal education was turning people into bonsais, and bonsais are never for the benefit of the tree.
Yeah.
It's for the beholder.
That's it. But it is really interesting, though. There is that sort of indestructible thread of animism, that's never quite been extinguished. No matter how much, weird Teutonic fascism you find infecting the DNA of the culture, you still see this this really indestructible core of animism and love of nature that is truly grounded in nature, not as an abstract, but as a lived experience of spirit. I still see that in a lot of. Yeah, I see that in the diaspora, Japanese diaspora in Australia, but also in whatever I'm consuming in my content, I'm seeing that. Is that real, or am I imagining it?
I mean, it's kind of confused. I think to a certain degree. I think a lot of the animism also, because one aspect of Japanese culture is that it is a highly technological modern culture, and at the same time it's also an extraordinarily superstitious culture. We are a culture rife with cryptozoology and ghosts and curses and those still capture the imagination. And still, exist. I mean, that's, a huge part of like the Japanese horror stories are kind of, why that's such a huge genre in Japan.
Yeah.
All right. So I think to a certain degree, that the supernatural is kind of related to the natural, world.
Harriet,
And the
feminist dialectic take on that. I need it. What do you got?
Oh, I mean, what I'm thinking of is when you mention the Japanese horror stories of all the peoples of the world, you have melted millions of people. The horror that was visited on Japan as another test on non-white people has got to be part of the national imagination, lurking around somewhere and confusing everything, because that is death in the air and haunting. I can't imagine it. And I've never studied this, not that I'd know it if I did, but that it has to have some kind of that escape from human destruction has got to be really important in terms of finding imaginative ways out of human destruction. No other people has been melted into sidewalks that way. What do you think?
I mean, that was, I think if I had to figure out the most consistent political position for myself, it has been anti-war. And a huge part of that is because growing up, I think I'm probably, the latter end of the generation where World War II and the nuclear bomb, especially during the 80s, because there was still the Cold War happening. So like nuclear war was still kind of like this, psychological possibility in people's minds. Yeah, but I think I am kind of like the tail end of that generation where that was everywhere in terms of popular media. I grew up with so many stories of because, and also people were still alive in my childhood that experienced war, that lost somebody, or our family lost family members, obviously, and that really, again, I think I am kind of the tail end of that generation, because as Japan kind of moved further and further. Now, while it's still part of the national consciousness, I think that has started to actively be faded away towards being back to being more amenable to militarism.
Yeah. Although there sure is a huge reaction against the Americans in Okinawa and other places as a lethal and frightening force, endorsed by the government and opposed by everyone else.
Right. I mean, it's as with anything everywhere, there is a lot of confusion around those topics.
Yes.
Topics.
Around because on one hand, right, America is still idealized.
Yes.
In the Japanese imagination, and at the same time, there is this, but these are the same people that fucking bombed us, and it's almost a schizophrenic kind of underpinning to the Japanese consciousness. I mean, to a certain degree, I suppose my family is a little bit, more heterodox than most Japanese families, but. I remember having an argument with my dad, and one of the argument was well, I didn't ask to be brought to a country that bombed my people. And he was quite, not happy about my comment.
Well, we were on cleanup there. Aboriginal Australia was on cleanup. You guys don't know about that, but see, a lot of our a lot of Aboriginal men were conscripted into World War II, and quite a lot of them weren't allowed to come back home because we weren't citizens, so we didn't have passports.
Oh.
So we could leave the country and go and fight overseas, but then when they tried to come home, a lot had to apply for re-entry, didn't get back in. So there are lineages of Aboriginal people all over the world who were unable to get back home here. There's a lot of stories from our old people about being involved in the rebuilding of Japan. And
I did not know this.
There's a bit of a bitterness in our elders towards, so we were fighting these people, and, they did Pearl Harbor and all this sort of stuff. They were like enemy number one. And yet we were able to put all these millions of dollars, billions of dollars, and all this labor and all these efforts towards rebuilding their country for them. What about us? Is there not even like, because at that stage and right the way through after that, there were stolen wages. Our wages were quarantined by the government and held in trust, and they were never returned. They were used to build the infrastructure here of highways and all that sort of things. Aboriginal wages were used to build Australia, basically. So we were kind of like you could give money to rebuild your enemies' cities, but you can't get, you know what I mean? But then, and at the same time, there's quite a bit of racism was particularly in the north, like against Asia. We were really indoctrinated with a lot of propaganda, anti-Asian propaganda, because we were seen as the first line of defense for the yellow peril that might just, cross the sea and start descending in their billions to take the continent. So it's like, well, we need all these black fellas along the top who are really racist who can, stop these people, like be the first line of defense, keep them busy until we get the planes there. You know what I mean? So there's weird stuff. I still have family members who'll be like, I'm not getting in that elevator. I'm not getting in that elevator with that man, mine there, little eye there, standing in that elevator. I'll wait for the next elevator. You know what I mean? It's like there's some weird stuff. There's some weird stuff in our communities from all of that. And if you think about the multiplicity of experiences and that dialectic idea, this sort of push-pull, this kind of this schizophrenia, I think you referred to it, you're going to get pathologies coming out of the most hideous experiences. And some experiences at this industrial scale of nations are just so unimaginably horrific that it's not possible to make sense of them. Trauma doesn't happen during the impact. Trauma happens after, if you fail to make sense of the experience. How the fuck do you make sense of Hiroshima, Nagasaki? How do you make sense of these things? How do you ever make sense of that?
Well, you can't make sense of the experience done to you, but the experience of, the United States as advertised was only triumph as you exterminate a whole people as much as you can. And we've never dealt with it. Germany really has dealt with what their war crimes were and taught their children. United States has never done that in any of our wars.
Yeah, that's
None
true.
of them.
Well, I've consumed so much Russian disinformation over the years that I find it hard to get away from the opinion that Russia actually won the Second World War and that it was, all over bar the shouting, and it was just a couple more things to sign when they decided, but we made these bombs. We made this. We got to use them. Japan.
Exactly. Well, and an experiment on a non-white people. But also Russia, in a sense, did win the war. They lost 30 million people.
Yeah. And they were supposed to be paid. They were supposed to be paid for it. But instead, Winston Churchill went on a speaking tour to drum up the next enemy. What a little turd that guy was.
Yeah. And the next excuse for keeping up the armaments production that they think took us out of the Depression. And so we have an armaments economy. But that there is
the military industry complex, right?
The military industrial complex, just as Dwight Eisenhower warned. Yes. And in human terms, you can't encompass what that meant. In military terms, they say. And it is also interesting as a sort of fact that after United States has lost every war since World War II, even though we have the biggest arsenal and the most sophisticated weapons in the world. We were a draw in Korea. We lost Vietnam, had to run. We lost Iraq. We lost Afghanistan, had to run trillions of dollars later. And so those things, Americans haven't really encompassed what their money has been spent on. And
what's remarkable
and why
to
they
me,
don't have it.
What's remarkable to me is that particular narrative pathway through their history that we've just been through is pretty much identical for Marxists and libertarians. Have you noticed? It's all the same talking points. I just had 1,000 YouTube videos flash through my head, Yeah. So I don't believe any of it. I don't believe any of it. I feel an affinity for all of that story, but at the same time, I keep a skeptical distance between myself, between my heart and my head with all of that story, because other things happened as well.
Yes,
the huge scale, the huge scale of suffering over centuries. Once you become aware of it, like just even the conversation we're having now, I feel it almost like a weight. But it's one of those things that, well, why aren't we all just kill ourselves? Like, what's the point? But the point is that we don't, right? That's the ultimate philosophical question. Is like, what are the reasons to stay alive? So even though they're talking about all these horrible things, there's still clearly something in all of us, and I hope everyone that listens that wants to continue being here. And I certainly found, in your book, there was, even if you think it was a suicide note, like I definitely got some stuff out of it, which is about how you interact with other people, how your culture can shape you, and how you can shape the culture.
Well, it was two other things apart from being a suicide note. Yeah, one of them was kind of a point of entry for people to figure out how to have yarns together. Like this yarn we're having now, this beautiful free range, eclectic, yarn. We're just finding so much solidarity together, from different viewpoints, and in not retreating into one ideological position or anything, but being really comfortable with contradictory stories sitting alongside each other.
Yes,
being careful to bring contradictory stories from the outside of our nice little group here, also to go, but this is as well. There are things that. There are contexts that our narrative here does not sit well with, and those are valid. You know what I mean? And so we're able to live with that complexity and the contradictory nature of those things. So for me personally, that was something I wanted to achieve with the book, was to teach people how to yarn. It's what we call so there's in the Bunya Mountains, which traditionally is a site. There's traditionally a site there where tens of thousands of people would come every 3 years. From lots of different tribes, from even thousands of miles away, people would travel to come together. Thousands of people in one place, all speaking different languages. And so there are a lot of protocols. There are embassy protocols that have been put in place. And one of those is called Wanju. And Wanju is the word for collective sense making. Which is pretty awesome, So, and we all have these yarning practices and these ways of, being able to respectfully bring everybody's competing stories together, and to enjoy the patterns of the aggregate of those stories. So that for me, that was one of the things the book was. But primarily, the book was a product that would enter the marketplace and spread far enough as a delivery system for Old Man Juma's ritual magic symbols. There's about half a dozen symbols there that are sort of designed to change people, like at the molecular level, when they see those and sit and think about them in yarn, when they see those symbols. And you wouldn't believe the amount of feedback I get from people around the planet saying that something in that book changed me. And there's nothing in the words that I've written there. It's just in those images that the old fellow put. They work on you. They're I don't know if that's ethical to do that, though. Well, because I haven't informed people up front that, oh, by the way, This is, you know.
Well, nobody
But
does
isn't
that anymore.
I actually did what all the conspiracy theorists think.
Yeah,
the global cabal has done with the vaccines. Like, I actually did that, and nobody's pulled me up for it. Shame on you.
Well,
shame on you, Liam, for giving me a platform to continue my global bloody experiment.
well, every book practically would want to do that. I warn you, I may change your mind. You know,
Yeah.
It's there. You know, the French poet Prévert, where he starts one of his poems, one of my favorites, where he says, "Our Father who art in heaven, stay there, and we'll stay here on earth."
Actually, you know, that poem does remind me of, you know, the way space exploration was kind of written about in the film, not the film, the book.
What was it? What happened? Sorry.
Oh no, I mean, just, you know, the whole the thing that really did kind of, you know, grasp me, especially since I've always been a critter person, but you know, talking about the intelligence of, you know, looking for intelligence elsewhere when we have so many here.
Yes.
That are, you know, not appreciated, not recognized, not engaged with, right? So that was that intro, I think, was you know, started me off just, you know, already being like really touched in many ways, because whether it's animals or whether it's people or whether it's, you know, anything else, you know, we tend to have, I mean, because, you know, to me anyway, I don't know how the Aboriginal culture deals with substance use issues within your community, but, you know, in the context of like the American sense, you know, it's not so much about the drugs, but it's about disembodied people.
Yeah.
You know, people who have lost a sense of purpose, you know, who have a very tenuous sense of connection to others.
That's it.
Or themselves.
You know, or even
if you want to discover
ability to
planets,
express.
discover this one first.
Exactly. Exactly.
You know where you are, then that resolves all that.
You know, and so to a certain degree, a lot of, you know, the aspects of reading in the book, especially about like yarning and you know, and I guess, you know, the therapy talk equivalent of that would be like, you know, engagement, right? That like how you know, what is good treatment, what is good therapy, because so much about, you know, therapy still is kind of this top down, like, we're gonna diagnose you, we're gonna tell you what's wrong with you, you know, rather than this, you know, dynamic exchange of, you know, hey, what's going on with you? And allowing people to, you know, because my way of treatment has never been like, I you know, people are, the person in front of me is a stranger. You know, I don't know what's wrong with that person. And that's not the point. The point is to allow people a space to fully express themselves so that they figure out and we collectively learn from each other and move forward. But it's not about fixing somebody.
No, it isn't.
Yeah, it's about making connections.
On that subject, Tyson, I don't know if you have to leave now because or Harriet or Ikoi.
I will have to leave in exactly 3 minutes because I've overstayed because it's exciting.
Yeah,
it has been exciting.
I guess
work, Harriet.
If we have to wrap it up, we have to wrap it up. I was just wondering exactly on that point, Ikoi, about being, you know, trying to. You don't want to sort of say, I'm above you, I know what's wrong with you or right with you or whatever. Like earlier on, you mentioned being diagnosed with adult attention deficit disorder or whatever it was. Like, how did that situation come about? And what was your reaction to it? Was it like, did you seek it out? Did someone tell you? How did that work?
No, I was at the doctor's, and he's at a GP, and he said I seem depressed, and I'm like, well, look at the world, bros, everything's dying, and I point out the window up the ridge. Can you see the dieback? All those trees dying up on the ridge in the pristine rainforest there. There's a reason for that. I'm really, really worried about it. It's really getting to me. This was like a decade ago, and he started yelling at me about progress.
Oh God!
And I'm like, dude, the logo for your practice here is an apple tree. Where's your apple tree? Anyway, and then he really got angry, and so I left.
Good.
And the next day, 6 police officers turned up on my doorstep.
Really?
With a letter from that doctor, and abducted me from my house, and I spent the next 24 hours in they started me out in a cell with a mattress on the floor that was covered in human shit and blood.
Ew.
And I've had a lot of family members disappear into that place and come back 6 months later, very different people. But I'm quite well educated, and I decided to just goodwill hunting the situation, and which I did. I kept making psychiatrists cry until they decided to just diagnose me with conduct disorder and send me home. So that was how I arrived at that.
That's horrifying.
So CD, ASD, I don't know. They just chucked a whole heap of labels on it. But I am quite aware that my thinking is extremely pathological. I'm sane enough to be able to see the extent of my mental disorders, which are massive and and labyrinthine, and your just gothic architecture of my insanity is just it's fractal, and it's expanding all the time. I'm just and the next book that I'm writing now is just I'm just letting that off the leash, and I don't know if anybody will be able to read this. It's like what's his name's the Red Book from,
right Jung,
old mate Carl Jung. It's just like
how do you balance that? Because one of the things I sort of found fascinating whilst reading your book is the thing about living in a complex system and seeing patterns. Patterns of creation is, I guess, sort of how it's worded, and in that you are essentially paying attention to lots of things, and so whether it's animals or other things in the natural world, and in that you might see meaning, right? That in the West we would call it randomness, but you would say it's exactly in randomness where there are patterns that you find. Now, the thing I sort of really found interesting is how do you balance that? Because, again, going down this route of sort of labels and pathology, there's words for finding patterns. An institution might say there are no patterns to be found. You are just suffering from, what was it called? Apophenia or something like that.
Whatever.
So how do you balance?
Well, we will talk about the difference between patterns and patternicity, but we have to say goodbye to Harriet first.
Yes, yeah.
Yes,
it would be terrible if she just slipped out.
I
didn't get to express my appreciation for
you.
The beautiful yarn you brought to us today, Harriet. Thank you so much.
Well, thank you so much. It's been we're kind of knitting together. It's great.
Yeah, it's lovely.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Harriet.
It was really good to meet you.
Same.
Well, look, so there's patternicity, and then there's pattern thinking, which are two different things. And that patternicity is how you bake ideas together when you're in QAnon. This ship is has this name on it, and that's also Hillary Clinton's call sign or whatever the hell it was when she was Secretary of Defense. And you can marry things together and then go, well, and there's a 10 in Central Park, so all those three things would triangulate that, and there's mole children. It's full on. That's patternicity. That's seeing a penguin in the clouds and going, oh, I had a penguin dream. It's just rubbish. it's like most of our dreams are just crap. People pay a lot of attention. We pay attention to dreams, but there's certain kinds of dreams you pay attention to, and the rest of it, it's just, it's your recycle bin.
Right. It's house cleaning.
Yeah. It's house cleaning. So it's like, don't get too carried away about absolutely every bloody thing. So there's patternicity and then there's pattern thinking. And, but I really feel like at the moment it's very difficult to determine any true signal. And I'm struggling to do it. I think there's so much noise that it's very hard to discern any signal. And I think pattern thinking and patternicity at the moment are, unless you're a master, it's very difficult to separate. And I'm certainly not a master, and I'm struggling. I'm struggling a lot. I can probably answer the question best with to finish, I can read an excerpt from the manuscript for the next book, if you like.
Sure, that sounds great.
Yeah, because it probably, you know what editing process is like. Maybe this is never going to exist anywhere but on this podcast. Yeah. So it's the start of a chapter. I'll just read 2 paragraphs. So originally I made a fishing spear for this chapter, but it just made me sad because I'd probably be arrested if I took it to the beach here, and besides, the few fish that are left in this place are too toxic to eat. So I started over and made a bullet spear instead, a wicked short projectile weapon that's effective in thick scrub and confined spaces. I keep it by the door because I've never quite shaken off the hypervigilant paranoia that comes with certain kinds of childhoods. Besides, after the first book, I became well known enough to get psychophans and death threats, but not well known enough to afford a secure living space. The spear allows me to sleep at night. It's weird, I know, but hey, spears don't kill people. People kill people. And so my cold, dead hands might hold on to this vicious little tool for a bit longer until I figure out a better way to get to sleep. As long as I keep the spear thrower locked in a separate room, it's safe. Sort of, but not really. I made it out of English privet because there's no orange trees available this far south. Privet might be good for hedges in Britain, but here they seed prolifically and take over hundreds of acres in just a few seasons, choking out every bit of life in a place. For some reason, people keep planting them in their gardens. It provides very straight, light, hard sticks, though, and like I always say, if life gives you privet, make spears. I keep stories in that spear about fear, bees, disinformation, and moral panic. It's not helping me to make sense of the world, though, because scared means stupid. And for some reason, the more weapons I make, the more terrified I become. I don't know. I think that answers the question in a sort of a shorter way. That's weird. Narrative can do that. And narrative doesn't always have to be a hero's journey or an anti-hero's journey. Sometimes it's something else, I guess.
That's crazy that people, it sort of brought you fans and dark fans, as it were, that the book has attracted, for want of a better word, nutters.
The dark fans are better than that. The people are saying, I'm going to kill your children. I kind of prefer them to sort of some of the more obsessive, positive sort of ones who terrify me even more. Not that it's not really a problem. It's just what is.
It's were you? my intuition was it was like creepy new age types.
That's it.
Yeah,
that's it. Right. You'll be talking to someone perfectly sane and you're having a great conversation. I mean, I don't know. Maybe Harriet's off now. Like I don't know. Like so, I talk to someone as deadly, as wonderful as Harriet, and we're having great conversations. And then I find out she's telling everybody that we're secretly married, and and that she, I'm the father of her children. I'm like, okay, all right. Let's just, yeah.
Ikoi, did you have the same hunch?
Well, it was, it's one of those things where like the very clear threats are at least like, you're expecting there's no question about what to expect from this person.
Mm-hmm.
versus like so much in society trades on niceness that has a very, very opposite and strange underpinning.
Yeah.
That
It's funny, the people who actually threaten me, usually these are the people who are genuinely reaching out and seeking a connection. Whereas the people who are like communicating sanely with me and seem to be making a connection are actually freaking insane.
Well, I mean, sometimes,
rather open an email that was talking about pipe bombs and because I know that's going to end somewhere good. I'm going to make a friend. But yeah. Sorry, Ikoi, keep going.
No, I mean, it's sometimes, I can kind of relate to that. I've talked to a lot of people, who are having very difficult times in their lives, and they can be threatening sometimes.
Yeah.
Or, have very, sometimes, I guess, frightening expressions and behaviors. Yeah. But yeah, I do agree that, they often are really trying to, it is their way of saying, hey, like, can you try to understand what's going on with for a moment?
They're in pain, they're afraid, and they want to connect with somebody, and they're they're at the end of their rope. I totally get it. I'm there right now,
and to a certain degree,
place.
Yeah. Sorry. Oh no, and to a certain degree, like the people that are smiling and like, wanting to talk to you usually have some kind of conversion attempt in mind.
Yep. But then there's people who talk crazy and threatening, and this is the worst kind, because I'm developing a heuristic here, because I'm that's what gurus do, and I've been completely audience captured into the guru role. So here I go. There's three kinds of people. Right. So anyway, there's the ones who are like genuinely nice. Yeah. Then there was one who seemed nice, but they're batshit crazy. You're just underneath, and they're the ones who are going to kill you. Then there's the ones who are batshit crazy on the surface, but really they're just reaching out. The worst thing and the most dangerous thing in the world right now is the people who talk batshit crazy, but it's a grift. They're cosplaying that, because that's actually how you get ahead in politics now, is to talk crazy and in absolutes and make threats that you don't mean, and to shout disinformation that isn't true. And to completely demonize a group of people or something like that, and to threat, like you call for, it's not just like, I disagree with this policy, or, hey, that policy's evil. It's not that. It's like, this guy didn't go along completely with us. He is a traitor. We must execute him. Set up a gallows out the front and hang the traitor. Like, there's politicians saying shit like that. It's like, and they don't mean it.
No,
they're just they're just polluting the signal to like jump onto this sort of tweak whereby they can direct eyeball hours towards themselves for a minute, and therefore get ahead. And nobody can be in politics without being nuts like that. No one can sell a book without doing some nuts stuff. And it's like nut. Anyway. I'm at least trying to dwell authentically in my insanity and to keep exploring it.
But it's funny. Your expression of politics kind of remind me about what you said about weather modification in your book a little bit.
Yeah. Yeah. No, totally red pilled into the chemtrails thing. Yeah. Although I found actual facts, and I didn't talk about chemtrails, and I actually talked to the people who were doing it and got their documents and used that. It was still, why was my attention on that? My attention on that was there because of disinformation in my freaking algorithm. It's like, I don't know. So basically now I just spend my whole time just sabotaging myself and trying to conduct all of my communications with the world as a kind of a collective natural experiment, whereby I'm like, hey, Exhibit A, here's a data set that is me. This is what crazy looks like, and here's where it's unfolding. Let's see where it goes together. While I'm trying to, I don't know, there's some ancestral part of me that's still grounded. that's still flowing with the groundwater, that's still connected through family that I don't get to see anymore. And, that I haven't seen for 2 years anyway because of the lockdown thing and travel restrictions. So it's like, there is still a part of me that's able to be in that right way and right story, and to sort of almost, in this eye of a cyclone of, the debris of all my relationships swirling around me, that I'm able to stand in the eye of the cyclone and observe that and try and discern a pattern that's real in the midst of all the noise, find a signal, find a narrative pathway through that isn't bullshit. And I haven't found one yet.
It's interesting. So you talk in the book, obviously, about the sort of progress myth. And then you look at the internet, and that is kind of mind-blowing, that we are essentially, as countries, all connected instantaneously, and we can do this. And the issue with that is just like your experiences, I guess, being who you are and being an author and all these kind of things, is that the floodgates open and everything comes in all at once. And so I think there is definitely part of this technology that is sort of scrambling our brains to some degree. And I don't necessarily believe that fits on some sort of progress map, but it's certainly new. It's certainly maybe a sort of amplified version of something that existed just with living in a large group of people at once upon a time. But it
is a technology of amplification in the end.
Yeah.
But look, I won't comment on that. It's some things I just like to outsource to. I mean, you don't often find people that you go, no, I think they've got a good narrative path through. So I just refer people to that, But a couple of my friends, Tristan Harris and Daniel Schmachtenberger, they're across that. Like, Tristan had that thing on Netflix. Can't remember what it was called, the social dilemma or something. Yeah, that one. They've got a pretty good narrative path through. There's the stuff that they put out that's quite simple, but then if you can follow up on some of their other work and hear them breaking it down and go into it, I think they've got a good finger on their pulse of what that is and how it's working. And they actually got together and they did a Joe Rogan episode. And that was very interesting because you got two people who understand how algorithmic bias and disinformation and dog whistles and everything happen. And it was amazing to sort of watch these kind of every dog whistle that came at them just kind of went around them like slipstream. You know what I mean? It was very interesting to watch them because they were talking about it, but they understand it so well that they just they have this almost immune response to that kind of audience capture that I was talking about before. So they did not get captured by the audience, by the biggest podcast audience on the planet. They didn't get suffer from that audience capture in the way that everybody else who goes on that show and has anything to do with it must submit to that audience capture. So that was pretty cool. So I, particularly seeing how they performed in that context, I believe those two, they're mates of mine, and I trust that they've got a decent narrative path through, one that at least I've seen work, under very very tough circumstances. I've seen that work as an immune response.
So do they actually, in terms of sort of their day-to-day lives, they're actually not, their brain isn't as scrambled as the rest of us because they're not falling for the tricks?
No, I think it is. I think both of them have managed to. I mean, everybody has to insulate themselves to a certain degree, and here's where the problem happens: is that they end up, you kind of have to choose somewhere to live in the algorithmic ecosystem of competing ideologies, and there are all these really weird. It's this ecosystem of strange bedfellows. So it's like yoga and wellness enthusiasts and white supremacists. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
A community. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And doing blockades together and shit. It's full on. There are some strange bedfellows, but you sort of see these guys kind of attached around the sense-making community, heterodox, intellectual dark web kind of around in there, where there's a lot of no good stuff floating around in that ecosystem. But that's kind of, I don't know, they seem to have found their place sort of out at the far edges of that, with a lot of stoics and, like stoic revivalists, there's some amazing people getting around in those spaces, and you'll find good thinkers in there, just like zipping around like free radicals. And that's where I found them. And I've been spending a lot of time in that ecosystem and exploring it for a couple of years. It's been an interesting space. I stumbled across it through complexity science because, I didn't know anything about complexity science when I wrote Sand Talk. I basically was just trying to translate some of my ideas into some sciencey sounding words, and the best things I could find were from complexity theory. And then people are saying, "Oh, he's a complexity theorist," and I think, "Shit, I better read up on this." I've never even read Fritjof Capra, but now I've had yarns with him, which is pretty cool. So I've studied up as much as I can on that, and I'm still going. I'm still a novice, but I'm tracking through it. But if you come into the complexity and systems thinking, community, then you're going to encounter, integral theorists and the entire, like the coaching industry, which is a really developmental, models and heuristics, which are, you do a few clicks back to where they come from, and it's like there's some eugenics shit in there. It's there's you find interesting things in there, but you find good thinkers too, and some people have managed to cobble together some good story that is actually a decent narrative path through all the noise.
Yeah, interesting, because it's one of those things that, in the world of marketing, they have lots of different categories for people they're trying to sell stuff to. And clearly the same happens with algorithms, that they have these sort of identities that they're either causing to happen because that's as the algorithm is designed, or it's happening. And then they go, okay, well, this is, like you said, fitness Nazis, basically. And that becomes sort of a political identity or a unit. And then you can message them in a particular kind of way, and it becomes in some ways a new kind of politics. It's not left and right. It's not as simple as that anymore. It's like it's understanding how all these people think, or how you can make them think. And it's just it's an interesting space because power is sort of operating again in a sort of behind the curtains kind of way.
Well, you go looking for a raw foods diet recipe, and the guy that's selling that is halfway through the video he's talking about how we have to stop these these international banking families,
right? Yeah,
which AKA the Jews. It's like, oh my God,
that's all where we are.
I just wanted a blueberry smoothie. Fuck.
But it's interesting because both the Tinder swindler and then there's something's happened in the UK as well, where these people were working for a fake company for like 2 or 3 months. All of it's just based on image, right? Like there's an image because that's the medium of the internet, and then there's a fantastic story that goes with it, and people just roll with it, and it works. And it is testament to what you're saying actually in your book as well, which is like the power of story. Like story is the vehicle for information, for action to some degree, because it inspires people to do a certain thing or act a certain way. But that's where I'm at.
The one last thing that I would like to refer to your book is, the quote that you said, if Sammy Apocalypse had a soundtrack, it would be Jingle Bells.
Yeah.
And it was one of those things where, again, I remember reading that this weekend thinking like, oh wow, like, is that kind of like, is the Japanese version of that like the anime that's been distributed into the world?
Yeah. But then even that critique, I mean, it's irresistible because it's like, oh, what a great meme. It's not really accurate though. It's a great critique, and it's one of my favorite narratives out there, but it's probably not as true as it sounds. I did get
Right.
look, I've made a lot of Viking friends, Viking animists, since I put that out there, because I got like a lot of hate. Like I said, like some of my best relationships start by people like threatening to kill me. Vikings weren't happy with that. They were like, no, that didn't come from there. It came from, no, that's Austrian. How do they go? They go like, yes, it's very interesting what you say, but I might have to hit you with my axe because it's kind of bullshit. So it came from Woden, and that was our thing first. So attributing that to Same and putting it in this decolonial perspective is kind of bullshit. And I want you to retract it immediately, and then we end up having a big fight, and then we become mates. Like, I've had some good yarns with Vikings. I'm good mates with this fellow Rune Rasmussen, and he's awesome. He's a Nordic animist who just he kicks ass, and he manages to I don't know. He works really hard to keep out sort of Nazis who are looking for some white supremacy symbolism to incorporate in their bullshit identities. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and he gets right down just to the dirty, like, stuff and the real stuff, and it's like, nah, that, like, he's too interested in ancient transgender rituals for the white supremacists to want to steal too many of his stuff. So he's a bit of a champion. He's a good mate. But yeah. It's it's kind of bullshit as well. But hey, isn't it a beautiful meme? I tell you, the most untrue stuff in that book, like the most hipster pop science, bloody you bullshit, horrible histories, etc., and the most divisive, banal, binaristic quotes in there. They're always the things that people people tweet about, like the stuff that they're excited about when they talk to me, and I'm like, oh god, that bit, like the bit at some stage, like I actually say the battle between good and evil, like what a dickhead, and but that people love that, and that's probably why I did it. Yeah, it's so evocative. It's like, oh, here's a satisfying. There's good people and there's evil people. The guy who wrote this book is good. I am good. And like, oh, great. I've got a friend who's going to help me fight all these enemies. And that bitch next door. You know what I mean? It's so satisfying. Yeah.
And I think it's also outsourcing your thinking as well. Like, I think that there is something very satisfying about coming across something that is, like you said, sort of enjoyable, but also sounds like the answer. And then you go, I found it. I don't have to go any further because this is what I think, or this is what I believe. And I think that a huge part of all kind of ideology sort of operates on that level of just like, I don't have to think anymore because I know the answer.
Right. And I think, I mean, sometimes, a lot of these things are about like kind of a shared emotional, and it could be projection on the reader's part, but like it kind of like rings a bell with you emotionally. And it's like, oh, okay, like there's somebody else, way on the other side of the planet that kind of, has this, like you imagine, I mean, because, when you have these reactions, you're not sitting there thinking like, oh, like, am I misinterpreting the writer? Right. Yeah, but that like, oh my God, we have this connection. That could be totally
but
projected.
There's true signal feeling. And then there's a limbic hijack. And that's the difference. And that's the hard part right now, because it's hard to tell which is which. What is true feeling, which is true thinking, and what is just a limbic hijack that somebody like me has like written at the start of a paragraph to like make you go,
Well, I guess that would be the ultimate puzzle in all of this. Is there such a thing as true feeling, or are we
there is.
essentially a hive sort of species, and that the thoughts and feelings you have are dictated by the system that you're in, and that they aren't your thoughts and feelings? They are the thoughts and feelings of the system. That doesn't have to be sort of machinic and like, terrible. It's just the cultural system that you are in. That's a much more interesting / disturbing idea, is that you think you're you, but actually you're just, you're another bee in the hive.
Well, that's it. But it's, but that feeling, it's not in you. And that's how you know. If the feeling is in a relation with others, I think we've had feeling as four people.
Mm-hmm.
We've had feeling together and connected in a way where I'm not feeling it in making a physiological response in me. It's I'm having feeling that feels external to me between Ikoi and myself, and between you and I, and of course Harriet as well, and then us together, and all the combinatorials of that. I feel like, we've been feeling through some of these things. We've also we've been deploying our own memes as well in the middle of all that. Of course you do, because it's a frickin', it's media. But at the same time, we've developed, just the beginnings of a relational space together. And that's there. So it's in, if you're going in, and that's with human and non-human, you have feeling for tree, and you might go and hug that tree out of some, a whole heap of just new age bullshit that you've learnt, in your like green resistance movement or whatever. And there's a whole heap of noise between you and the signal of that tree and your actual thinking, which is more like feeling, but a feeling that exists between you and this other entity that's you're in relation with. Now, all you have to do is come into good relation with that tree. And so you find a different story that's has no ideology in it. And so you go, okay, well, this tree's evolved. I mean, you got evolution's story right there. So you don't think it in words, but you feel the shapes of what that tree needs and what it's missing. And it's for thousands of years, it's enjoyed our urine as part of its diet, and now it's not getting it anymore. It hasn't had it for like 50 years. And so, you think, maybe I don't hug this tree now. Maybe I connect with this tree by taking a big piss on it. And, and so you're standing there and you're pissing on this tree, and just with a real story there, where you're going, hello tree, this is for you. I hope that's good. How you going? And you just kind of feel this connect there. And there's there's stuff that's non-verbal, or even, and it's not imaginal, even it's not abstract at all. But there's a relational knowledge there that is in that feeling, and you get to enjoy a pure signal for a moment. And anyway, that might not help you out much or give you anything to share in a podcast, but it does help you to remain familiar with what a real signal feels like and what a real feeling feels like when that hasn't been manufactured for you and prepackaged into a meme and then shoved up your ass.
But it's also that thing of, you make the point about being a custodial, that we are a custodial species, really. And I think the difference is that there's no power here, right? None of us are like a boss and we're not employing each other. We're just having a conversation. And so to my mind, that's a huge thing. If you're in a work meeting, you just become aware of power and just it changes the nature of
that's it.
What you talk about.
Every cell in your body is going to just rebel against the idea of a boss, of someone who's somehow special and who is above you. We're not supposed to have that,
right?
Because that's when you get the singular narratives arising. from special people who create the narrative and their minions around them. So even when it's collective, it's from a collective of people who are following somebody, So it's a unilateral narrative, and that's what we call in my community wrong story. Wrong story comes from the collective, and it comes from a multiplicity, from a pluriverse of different eyes and different narrative pathways through different data sets. And that's it. That's right story. Yeah.
Right.
Sorry, Ikoi was going to talk too.
Oh no, I mean just you talking about the custodial position, and also the explanation of violence not being like corralled into very limited numbers, but yes, that that you're and I'm I've got so many thoughts running through my mind that it's kind of hard to put it together, but just being reminded of that. And what wrong story is kind of part of that process of how we weaponize, I guess, violence into a singular aim rather than a mediation of conflict.
Yeah. Well, there's a distributed expression of feeling that is that's supposed to bring people into better relation. That's what violence is. Right. Violence is a way of bringing people into relation. It's supposed to be a good thing. It's supposed to be ritualized. It's supposed to make everybody feel good and be happy and learn and grow.
Right. Yeah. And also about how once somebody's punished, they have a clean slate.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it's never about defeating. So in our ritual combat, it's never about there being a winner and a loser, like this guy won or something like that.
Right.
It's just about everybody giving a good account of themselves. Mm-hmm. So it's not ableist in that Viking way of we'll let the I'm going to fight this little crippled fellow now, and we'll let the gods decide who is right and who is wrong, and I will hit him with my axe, and if he's in the right, then the gods will intervene, and he will somehow win, even though he only has one arm. It's it's not like that.
Right.
These are ritualized combats that are, they have very, very strict rules that allow people to be able to give a good account of themselves and walk away with their head high, so that nobody's a victim and nobody's a perpetrator afterwards. It completely eliminates the idea of a victim, So you have people who get to experience agency if they have cerebral palsy, and that definitely aren't going to be an MMA fighter. They can still step up and, punch on and give a good account of themselves and walk away with their head high, and know that they have agency, physical agency in the world. It's a beautiful thing. It's a beautiful thing, violence, when it's distributed and it's in its right way.
Right. I found that to be a very, very, I guess, touching chapter.
Thanks for that. It's one that disturbs people a lot. It's people sort of go, I can fucking smell misogyny around here somewhere. I know it's there.
I guess it's it's one of those things where I guess when you have substance use disorder in your history, it brands you for life a lot of time, and people constantly talk about this experience of never being able to escape that, within whether it's with their family, whether your friends, your intimate relationships, that it's I remember a client describing it as the albatross and the noose, that and it's a very common, right, and to a certain degree, like how we talk about addiction is a permanent brain disorder for example, kind of reinforces this idea of this like permanent state in people.
Oh yeah. Yeah.
And I feel like, reading that chapter was really touching in a way of like, because a lot of times, right, like one of the things that I was reading through Twitter that was really a very strong statement that struck me was that none of the anti-stigma talks touches my intrinsic sense of shame, was the quote. And it was one of those things where, when you see quotes like that, you're like, oh yeah, like, listening to client accounts, I hear that constantly in their accounting. And so to a certain degree, like your chapter kind of gave me, a glimpse of an idea of how to, reshift that kind of narrative in a way.
Yeah. Well, there is a competing and valid narrative in there, and a lot of middle class settler or colonist women have presented me with this other narrative, which is quite correct also, and that's like that's all very well, but basically what you're saying is that the violence that has been done to me is my own fault, and that if I don't want it to happen, then I have to learn how to fight. And that's wrong. I don't want that. I have the right to exist in a world where there is no violence. I have the right to exist in a world where animals aren't slaughtered for food. And, nobody ever hits anybody and no violence is done. I have a right to exist in that world. Violence is wrong. I don't want to see it, and I don't ever want to do it, and I don't ever want anybody to do it to me. That's a valid narrative. I mean, from my narrative point of view, it's like, well, that doesn't. So yeah, you're gonna need to move to another dimension of reality or something, because the basic physics of that doesn't work. But that's only from my narrative perspective. But I sit alongside that story, and I actually hear what it is. So rather than trying to fact check it or defeat that point of view, I feel into that relation, and and we do things together. I've had a really strong research collaboration with the settler woman that's pushed back harder than anyone else on me about that message and about that narrative, and we've had the most productive research collaboration I think I've ever experienced. We're both on with completely different narratives about violence and gender, and we we collaborate on the richest, most amazing projects and dialogues together, because we seem pretty happy to actually just be in relation with each other with completely opposite, foundational premises for our thought. Yeah.
Right. I mean, because, on one hand, like, I'm 4'10", and I am the opposite of a physical strong specimen.
Yeah.
So I absolutely relate to, and also loving animals. Like, it does make me sad when they're killed for food, And so I do, on one hand, like, I do understand, where people come from in terms of like, I never want to personally participate in it. Right. Or see it, but I think, I think that there is a difference between a ritualized form of it and an emotional outrage.
Yeah.
And I think that's, where the distinction sometimes gets blurred in maybe, understanding certain form, because I don't necessarily see that as violence. I see that as conflict resolution of what you were describing.
Yeah.
If that makes sense. It's just more a physical form of conflict resolution rather than a verbal form of conflict resolution, or both, right? So I wasn't looking at that chapter in like, oh, these are people committing violence, but rather, because violence is kind of what happens in conflict, right? You generally don't have violence when you get along and everything's peachy keen. And so I wasn't thinking of, the violence aspect, but I was, really kind of honing in on like, oh, this is a really, really interesting way of conflict resolution.
It's not really a story about violence. There's so much more in there.
Right.
Right.
Well, it's social cohesion, right?
Right.
Yeah, that's it. And it's about working with what is in your context, what is in your environment, what your landscape is, and the law of the land that's there. The ecosystems, they're all the different systems that you're inhabiting. What is the reality of these things, and how do you work within those, with the reality of them, not how you would like them to be, or what your personal preferences are, or what your personal ideology is, but how do you be responsive to your actual environment? So you might step back from some things. So I'm living in a reality. I mean, we mentioned the violence of meat, but I'm living in a reality of industrial, farming, and
yes,
that's all my food is coming from that. But being somebody who has spent a lot of his life hunting and butchering his own meat, that it's tempting to bring that story and that narrative and that experience to the table there, and to construct a some kind of moral high ground there, or some kind of thing that I think is going to give me a position that sounds great that others might follow. But in fact, it almost precludes me from it. It's a very marginal viewpoint in any critique of industrial farming or what food is now. My experience of harvesting, gathering, hunting, butchering food for myself and my family is it's almost irrelevant. It's almost irrelevant. It certainly doesn't give me a voice that's worth listening to in that, because I don't know enough about it. Like I'm going to want to listen to a vegan working through and sense making around soybean production and how the hell you can do it without monocropping. You know what I mean? So that it's not killing everything.
Right.
A vegan who's actually, thinking it through, rather than just going, the entire world should be soybeans.
Right.
We need to put a fence down the middle of the Serengeti with the lions on one side and the zebras on the other. That person's narrative is just as irrelevant as mine. Being like, oh yeah, I like to hunt and butcher my own meat. Every man gotta have his meat. Soy boy. That's irrelevant.
Right.
That's freaking irrelevant.
Well, there's a potentially exciting future of lab-grown meat where no animals have to suffer,
except for the people who eat it.
But,
hey, there it is.
I mean, it's tricky.
Well, traditionally, I am from the land of, tofu and soy milk. It's part of my, and I love the stuff personally, but I don't necessarily expect anyone else to. But this concept of like, if you stop factory farming, of animal husbandry, that there is no suffering. Monocropping does create, a lot of environmental suffering. So that's a very simplistic, reductionist way of looking at, that
it is
complicated issue. Yeah.
Look, there's a million, I can feel the software running and just pricking me right in my limbic system right now, and throwing up, a whole heap of, bullshit that I want to throw straight at you and debate that. You know what I mean? And I'm just like, no.
Well, also it has been 2 hours.
That would kill the yarn, and it wouldn't move any of us any closer to any kind of helpful insight or anything else. It would just be bullshit.
I do recommend a book, Fully Automated Luxury Communism by Aaron Bastani. Yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, that's where I sort of got the meat thing from, because he just goes off on various tangents about various things like that, and it's very interesting, and you might enjoy it. But yeah, we're 2 hours, so it's like, an hour over probably.
I gotta go.
Yeah, so thank you very much.
Literally, my bladder is about to pop.
Yeah. Well, I'll be putting a thing out on Twitter now, just saying that we're married, just so you know. Jokes. All right.
Context is everything. All right.
Yeah. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you so much, Ikoi.
Thank you.
All right. That was beautiful.
By the way, listeners, if you have enjoyed anything you've heard Harriet say in this program, you will definitely enjoy Capitalism Hits Home, which is a solo program that Harriet does through Democracy at Work, which is a worker-owned cooperative that produces other great programs such as Economic Update with Richard Wolff and the Anti-Capitalist Chronicles with David Harvey. I can't recommend enough that everyone also listen to Capitalism Hits Home if you enjoy It's Not Just in Your Head.
And you can hear more from Harriet on her radio show called Interpersonal Update. It's on WBAI at 2:30 EST on Wednesday afternoons and in the WBAI archives.